Ever get that feeling, when you're really lost in a song,
Mm.
like totally swept up in the emotion of it? You start to imagine, like, who the artist is, what their life must be like.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's so easy to do, right? Project our own ideas of fame and what it means onto these artists.
And that's what we're getting into today. This idea of fame, seen through the lens of, well, one of the most famous voices ever. We're diving into this really thought-provoking reflection from the ChattBOX podcast called An Emotional Journey. Reflections on Whitney, Can I Be Me? And of course, we're talking about Whitney Houston. I mean, that voice, just legendary, decades of hits, her impact on music, it's huge.
Absolutely. Her voice, the power, the technique, it became the gold standard for so many singers who came after her. And it wasn't just technical skill, it was the emotion she poured into every note. You could feel it deep down.
Right, right. And this ChatBOX reflection we're looking at today, it goes deep. It looks at Whitney's story, especially through this documentary, Whitney, Can I Be Me? 40. It gets into the vulnerability behind the superstar image, the kind of pressure that comes with being that famous, that globally recognized. So what we're doing today is unpacking the key insights from this reflection. We're going to be focusing on the emotional weight of fame, something people talk about, but how many of us truly get it?
That's exactly it. We want to dig deeper than the surface, go beyond the headlines, and really examine what Whitney's experiences, as discussed in this podcast, tell us about the real cost of that level of fame.
So let's go back to the beginning. Whitney Houston. Even before those massive stadium shows, she had this incredible musical upbringing. Gospel music was practically a family tradition, singing in church from when she was really little. It's almost like that foundation set her up for everything that came after.
It was foundational. It wasn't just preparation. It shaped her entire style. That deep connection to gospel, it gave her voice that raw, authentic emotion that resonated with everyone. You could hear it. Even when she was singing pop music, that spiritual core was always there.
And then the 80s hit, and her rise was just meteoric. I mean, her debut album, 1985, self-titled, The Greatest Love of All, How Will I Know? Those weren't just songs. They were cultural moments. Everyone was singing them.
And think about that. Her debut album wasn't just successful, it was a phenomenon. Instant global superstar status. And you're so right, those songs weren't just catchy, they showed off her insane vocal range and that ability to tap into universal emotions, the optimism in How Will I Know, the pure power of The Greatest Love of All. It was all there from the very start.
And it was more than just hitting the high notes, wasn't it? It was the way she connected with you, the listener. There was this vulnerability in her voice, even when it was so powerful, both in recordings and live. You felt like she was singing directly to you, sharing something deeply personal.
Exactly. She had this amazing ability to make you believe her. That sincerity, that emotional transparency, even in a huge arena, it was a big part of her appeal. And on stage, she was magnetic. Like, she owned it, moved with this effortless grace.
And her influence went way beyond music. The ChatBOX reflection talks about how she really broke barriers down for African-American artists, especially women. Not just in music, but in film, too, with The Bodyguard. That's a massive achievement.
For sure. If you zoom out and look at the wider picture, her success globally on that scale, it really challenged the way things were done. It proved that talent crosses all boundaries.
Yeah.
She had this crossover appeal that was so important, and it paved the way for a lot of artists who came after her.
It makes you think, Because even as her personal life was being scrutinized, her music was getting so many people comfort, this sense of connection. It's like her art offered this solace that maybe she was struggling to find herself.
Yeah, that's a powerful observation. It shows how complex it is for artists, this ability to express these deep emotions that maybe they haven't worked through themselves. Her music became this anchor for so many people while she was dealing with her own storms.
And then there's the documentary, Whitney, Can I Be Me? The ChatBOX reflection really dives into it, and it seems like it wasn't afraid to show things as they were, a more raw, unfiltered look at her life. Not the perfectly polished image we usually see.
Definitely not. The documentary, as the ChatBOX analysis points out, it's a much more intimate portrayal, sometimes even uncomfortable. It really highlights the tension between her public persona and her private struggles, the vulnerability that was always there underneath that amazing talent.
The reflection mentions they used some really personal footage from her childhood, even her early career. You get to see those early steps on her journey, the roots of that extraordinary talent, and maybe even the early pressures she had to deal with.
And what's so insightful is seeing how her childhood, those early experiences, they shaped her, not just as a singer, but as a person. Especially when she became famous later on, it gives you this crucial context for understanding what she went through.
And they didn't shy away from the tough stuff, did they? They show her struggles, the vulnerable moments, but the reflection also points out her resilience. It's a more complete picture.
Absolutely. By showing both the highs and the lows, the documentary gives you a more authentic picture of Whitney, a more human one. It doesn't try to sugarcoat things, which is why the reflection on it is so interesting.
The ChatBOX podcast reflection really hits on something important. It says the film is both a tribute to her legacy and a commentary on how hard it is to be famous. It makes you think about the price you pay, emotionally, personally, to live your life in the public eye like that.
And that brings up a really important point. What exactly are those burdens? The reflection talks about it in detail, the constant pressure on celebrities, the impact on their mental health. And Whitney's experience is a powerful example.
It's the never-ending expectation to be perfect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every little thing you do, every word you say, it's all scrutinized, judged on a huge scale. The reflection makes a good point. Even a small slip-up can trigger this massive backlash. It's a brutal cycle.
Yeah, most people can't even imagine that level of scrutiny. Your relationships, your creative choices, even how you look, all analyzed and commented on by millions of people. The ChatBOX podcast really highlights how the paparazzi, the tabloids, they just amplified her vulnerabilities, made everything so much harder.
And that level of exposure 24/7 can be so damaging.
Yeah.
We saw some of Whitney's struggles play out publicly, and it's hard not to see a link between that pressure and the tough times she went through.
And the reflection connects that to other artists who've been through similar things, Britney Spears, Kurt Cobain. It shows that Whitney's experience wasn't unique. It's something that can happen to anyone at that level of fame.
It gives you this bigger picture, doesn't it? The pressure of fame can have a real impact on people no matter how talented they are, their background, anything. It's a pattern.
Exactly. And the ChatBOX podcast points out that when people are under that kind of pressure, they might turn to unhealthy ways of coping, substance abuse, mental health issues. It becomes this downward spiral.
The reflection is really clear about the need for more awareness, more support for mental health in the music industry. Talent and fame don't make you immune to these very human struggles. In fact, they might even make things worse.
100%. It's about having better support systems in place and, maybe even more importantly, more compassion from the public, seeing the person behind the celebrity, recognizing that they're human, they're vulnerable.
Which leads us to the personal reflections, the key takeaways from the ChatBOX podcast. It talks about us, the fans, and how we put celebrities up on these pedestals, forgetting that they have complex lives, problems just like everyone else.
It's like it's built into celebrity culture, projecting our own ideas onto these figures. The reflection uses Whitney's story to remind us that she was a real person with real struggles behind all the talent and the glamour.
And it emphasizes how important it is to be kind, to be empathetic. When someone in the public eye makes a mistake, instead of judging, try to understand the pressures they're dealing with.
Let me put it to you, the listener, this way. Think about how you engage with celebrity news. Are you adding to the problem, or are you trying to be more understanding? Recognizing that these are real people with real lives.
The reflection also brings up the need for strong support systems, especially for those in the public eye. It suggests that maybe if Whitney had more consistent support, things might have been different.
It shows how important connection is, having people you trust. It doesn't matter how famous or successful you are, everyone needs that. Having a good support network can make a huge difference, especially when things get tough.
And here's something that really resonated with me. The reflection talks about how listeners might connect with Whitney's story through their own experiences, times they've struggled or shown resilience. It reminds you that everyone's vulnerable, everyone needs support.
Right. Even if you haven't experienced that level of fame, we've all faced challenges, felt overwhelmed, needed help from others. Whitney's story, the way the ChatBOX podcast explores it, it goes beyond celebrity and gets to something very human.
In the end, the ChatBOX podcast reflection leaves us with this. Whitney's legacy is about celebrating her talent, her music, but also about being more compassionate, offering more support to anyone going through a tough time. It's a powerful message.
It is. It's about appreciating her artistry and acknowledging her humanity. That's how we get a fuller picture of her impact.
So wrapping up our deep dive into the ChatBOX podcast on Whitney Houston, we looked at her incredible talent, her quick rise to fame, the insights from the documentary, and the emotional burden that comes with being a superstar. And we talked about the need for compassion, support, and a better understanding of what it's like to live in the public eye.
And for you listening, we hope this gave you a new way of thinking about celebrity culture and the human stories behind the fame.
Which brings us to our final thought. Knowing what we know now about the impact of fame, thinking about Whitney Houston, how can we, as a society, do better? How can we create a more supportive, more empathetic environment for people in the public eye, while still appreciating everything they contribute? Something to think about.